May 21st, 1982, the Falkland Islands. As a British amphibious task force unload troops to start the recapture of the islands, it comes under heavy bombardment by dozens of Argentine fast jets. Right in the firing line that day was the frigate HMS Ardent, determined to do what it could to protect the ships inside the anchorage from harm. What followed was a devastating loss and a story of duty, sacrifice, and survival. The landing of British troops on the Falkland Islands came after a journey of 7,000 miles and several weeks of preparations and naval combat around the islands. If you want to understand how the Falklands War got to this point, it's worth checking out our infographic poster on the conflict. It's packed with information on what happened, on what ships, aircraft and troops were involved on both sides. By the third week in May, the British task force had established naval superiority around the islands and had identified the best landing zone to get boots on the ground, San Carlos Water on the western side of East Falkland. The amphibious task force began its journey into the landing beaches on the evening of May 20th. Leading the way was the Type 21 frigate HMS Ardent, and her destination was a gunnery station to the south of San Carlos Water, where she could support SAS units ashore around Goose Green. She arrived at 9 PM and awaited orders. As the night passed, more troop ships arrived in San Carlos. Outside the bay in Falkland Sound, British warships formed a fragile defensive line. Their job was to defend the landing from Argentine air attack once the sun was up. This was incredibly dangerous. The terrain crippled radar coverage, leaving these ships nearly blind and with no room to manoeuvre. Up against fast, low-flying aircraft with brilliantly determined pilots, these ships in what became known as Bomb Alley would soon feel very vulnerable. And no ship was more vulnerable than HMS Ardent. Her fire support position was quite a long way away from the other ships in Bomb Alley, and to put Goose Green in range she had to operate very close to land. That proximity interfered even more with her radar and missile systems. Her only early warning would come from lookouts with binoculars. Commodore Mike Clapp, in charge of the amphibious landing, knew how big of a risk Ardent was taking. Writing later, she was a sitting duck to air attack. I knew it, and so did her commanding officer. The commanding officer in question was 34-year-old Commander Alan West. Ardent was his first command. Just weeks earlier, he and his crew had held a memorial at sea for the previous HMS Ardent, a Second World War destroyer which in 1940 had sacrificed itself to try and protect the aircraft carrier Glorious from harm. As he laid a wreath on the spot Ardent had gone down, West had told his crew, "If we're faced with the same problem, I hope we'll take the same difficult decision." At 7 AM the sun rose over the Falkland Islands, and much to the irritation of the British crews, the weather was beautifully clear that morning, after days of cloudy skies and rough seas. It was perfect flying weather. It would take some time for sorties to take off from Argentina and reach the British ships, but in the meantime there were local threats in the form of Pucará aircraft from Goose Green. From 7:26 AM, Ardent began to put fire down on the airfield at the direction of SAS spotters embedded nearby. Over the next 5 hours, more than 150 rounds from the frigate's 4.5-inch gun would be fired, destroying 3 Pucarás on the ground. But they didn't get them all, and at 8:30 a pair of Pucarás took off and made a probing run towards Ardent, approaching low from the southeast. The frigate fired a Seacat missile to intercept, but the Argentine aircraft turned away and dropped back behind the ridgeline, slipping out of sight. This was an ominous sign of what was to come. Enemy aircraft appearing suddenly from behind terrain, flying too low and too fast for Ardent's missile system to reliably engage. After a second Pucará approach was broken up by Sea Harriers with 1 aircraft shot down, there was a lull in air activity. HMS Brilliant, which was coordinating the Harriers, downgraded the air raid warning from red to yellow, meaning there was still a high risk of air attack, but no immediate threats. This was a relief to Ardent's crew, who had already had a long and stressful day. It seemed like a good time to hand out cups of tea and regroup for the next wave. Just before midday, Gunloader Jeff Gullick had finished his tea and took over manning the portside 20mm anti-air gun. As he turned his gaze out to sea, he was suddenly startled by a single Argentine A4 Skyhawk appearing over the hill in front of him and streaking towards Ardent, just 30 feet above the waves. Gullick opened fire and raised the alarm, but there was little anybody else aboard could do. Within seconds, the Skyhawk, piloted by Captain Pablo Caballo, screamed overhead, pulling up and dropping 2 500-pound bombs. Miraculously, the 2 bombs fell either side of the frigate, and due to the incredibly low altitude, they failed to explode, a problem that would have flit Argentine air attacks throughout the Battle of San Carlos. The only damage to Ardent was to the radar antenna, which was bent out of shape as the Skyhawk passed overhead. It was an incredibly lucky escape for Ardent. According to Mark Higgitt, Commander West dragged his weapons teams and lookouts together and bollocked them. You should have been shooting by the time you saw it. His tone was terse. There would be no second wake-up call. At 1 PM, Ardent completed its gunfire support mission and was ordered to reposition to the north and take up a new patrol line to guard the southwest approach to San Carlos water. She reached her new station at 1:35 PM. Ardent was now right in the firing line along one of the main approaches to the landing zone, charged with, in Commander West's words, drawing fire. Our job, ideally, was to make things attack us so that they weren't attacking the amphibians. It did not take long for Ardent to be called into action. At 1:40 PM, 4 Skyhawks from the 3rd Fighter Attack Squadron were spotted to the southwest. Commander West immediately increased speed to 17 knots and began a series of hard turns, trying to keep her weapons facing in the right direction as the aircraft circled in from her port side. But the frigate systems weren't designed for this. The Seacat launcher couldn't engage, the aircraft were too low. The ship's gun struggled to track the fast-moving targets. At 1:44 PM, the Skyhawks attacked, coming in one by one from the port side. 6 bombs were dropped in rapid succession as the crew hit the deck. 1 hit the diving store and went through the auxiliary machinery room but failed to explode. Another 2 struck the hangar and devastated it, destroying the Seacat launcher and wrecking the Lynx helicopter. Fires broke out aft, flooding began from burst fire mains, and half of the ship's power was lost, rendering the main gun inoperable. Ardent was now virtually defenceless. Thankfully, the ship's engines had escaped damage and Ardent was able to head north, ordered by Commodore Clapp to make for the safety of the main force inside San Carlos water. But at around 2 PM, another wave arrived, this time 2 flights of Skyhawk from the Argentine Navy, led by Lieutenant Commander Alberto Filippi and Lieutenant Benito Rotolo. They too circled just outside missile range, then closed in. With the main gun dead and missiles gone, Ardent's crew could do little more than fire 20mm cannon and light machine guns. Up to 16 bombs were dropped in this attack. 2 to 4 struck the ship, causing massive damage to the stern. 1 hit the hull underwater and again failed to explode, but others did. Steering was lost, the ship began to list badly to starboard, the stern was wrecked, fires raged, and flooding worsened. Desperate damage control efforts were made, but the situation was fast becoming hopeless. The ship, out of control, drifted towards land. On the bridge, the severe damage to the ship had knocked out communications, making it difficult for Commander West to assess the full scale of the damage. Word soon reached him that men aft were preparing to abandon ship without orders. He reacted furiously to this, but before long Lieutenant Commander Terry Pendrus, the Marine Engineering Officer, arrived on the bridge to report that Ardent was critically damaged and that she could go down by the stern at any moment. To make matters worse, a few minutes later, Lieutenant Commander Andre Gordon Lennox, Ardent's first lieutenant, arrived on the bridge to report that the forward auxiliary machine room was wrecked, all of the ship's power was lost, and fires were getting dangerously close to the missile and torpedo magazines. Commander West suddenly no longer had any choice. If he didn't get his crew off as quickly as possible, there was every chance that dozens more could be killed in magazine explosions or a sudden plunge to the bottom. At 2:15 PM, 90 minutes after the initial bomb hits, he gave the order to abandon ship. HMS Yarmouth arrived shortly after and came alongside. The wounded were transferred first, and then the rest of the crew. Commander West was the last to leave, stepping off at 2:55 p.m. For hours after being abandoned, Ardent stayed stubbornly afloat. For so long, in fact, that West and others even dared to hope she might be saved. But at 7:15 p.m, a massive explosion tore through the hull, likely the torpedo or missile magazines finally cooking off. She continued to burn into the night and sank sometime between 2 and 7 a.m. on May 22nd. When the sun came up, Ardent was gone and 22 sailors had been killed. 3 Argentine Skyhawks were lost in the attacks on Ardent, 2 shot down by Sea Harriers and 1 which was damaged and crashed while trying to land at Stanley. 1 pilot was killed. But Ardent and the other ships braving Bomb Alley that day had done their job. In addition to Ardent's loss, both Antrim and Argonaut had been struck by bombs that failed to explode, but very few Argentine aircraft had gotten through to the landing area, buying the troops their vital breathing space to get themselves established ashore. Ardent was targeted by around 20 bombs in the course of May 21st, all bombs that could have targeted troop ships packed with hundreds of soldiers inside the amphibious landing zone. Had some of these struck vital ships like the Canberra, the recapture of the Falklands could have failed before it even began. In the finest tradition of her Second World War namesake, Ardent had given everything to protect others from harm. Though the sacrifices made by those in Bomb Alley had bought the ships in San Carlos time, it was far from the end of the story. Over the next 4 days, the Argentines would return again and again, hammering away at ships with nowhere to go. More would be lost: Antelope, Atlantic Conveyor, and Coventry. But the landings continued, and a vital foothold in the Falklands was established. If you want to learn more about the Falklands War, you can watch our full feature-length documentary covering all the key aspects of the war. It's a good companion to our infographic poster on the conflict, which is worth having a look at if you haven't already. Thank you as always for those who support the creation of these videos on Patreon. If you want to get early access and help make this content happen, it'd mean the world if you checked it out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.